Hello, you wonderful people. I'm going to let you know right off the bat, I am immediately going to be jumping into spoilers. There's going to be a spoiler review / discussion, so I'm letting you know that ahead of time. There's no non-spoiler stuff. So if you have not seen Black Widow, do not watch this video because I don't want to spoil anything for you. So you have been warned. So right off the bat, kind of going into Natasha and Yelena's past and everything was kind of interesting. I don't know what I really kind of expected, because I guess in my head I thought like she was a part of the program from the youngest age, which I think technically she was, because when it was all said and done, they were kind of like your undercover Russian family living in America, being like, oh, pretending to be this all-American normal family. They were there for 3 years. I mean, it very much reminds me of the show The Americans in that regard, except their kids aren't even their own kids. They're just kids that were given to them to be like, yeah, okay, we got a father, we got a mother, and we got 2 children that we put together. Because I was under the impression like Yelena and Natasha were actually blood related. They're not. They were just 2 orphan children in this particular situation, chosen to be put together along with this family. They were a family for 3 years, and kind of living this life, because Natasha was old enough to know what was up. So like when it was all said and done, it's like she's like, no, I don't want to go back, because I think she was already part of the Black Widow program, and now she was, I'm assuming that's what that was kind of about. It could have just been like, even before the Black Widow program, it could have been something else, but he did say like, no, you were a part of this before, when you were even younger than Yelena, because she didn't want Yelena to go through it, because it's like, no, she's like 6 years old, so she was old enough to know and have experienced all of that, and she didn't want to go back. That's why when she had that opportunity, she had the gun, she was like, get away. She's like, no, she knew immediately what this was about, especially when they were, because I guess she was always in the know about it. Yelena's the one that's like, oh, I thought this was our happy family and everything. Natasha's the one that knew from the beginning, because Melina was like, it's time to go, and she's like, I'm sorry, because the longer they were able to live this life, the further away Natasha could be from all that, widow related stuff. So to have your entire life turned upside down like that for both of them, especially it's tough for Natasha, but it was even tougher for Yelena, because she didn't know what was going on, and obviously seeing like these young girls turned into these warriors / assassins, and then her cutting to like the moment her family's broken up in the past to be where we are right now at present day, where her family, the Avengers, have kind of fallen apart because of the Accords and everything. So yeah, Roger's on the run, everyone else has been locked up, you're kind of on your own, and that's an interesting conversation that comes forth like over the course of the show. And I mean, the movie and everything is about how, I think for Natasha, she was always kind of hopeful about this family she kind of built for herself, but the fact is it fell apart. I think for her almost kind of came as no surprise, because I think there's a part of Natasha that was just assuming it was only a matter of time. I think for her, it's like, I allowed myself to get comfortable enough that believed that this would last forever, but no, of course it was going to fall apart always, because she's lived her entire life being someone else in every other family she's ever known, because she talks about it later on in the movie, but her biological mom, she's like, she threw me on the streets like I was trash, like left me there, so that's how I got associated with all of this. My other real family ended up being a fake family, and the Avengers family, well, that wasn't a family either, so she's kind of out in the world alone. It's like, for her, it's like, I've been in the world alone, taking care of myself, this is no different. It's like, yeah, like, I think the Avengers breaking up was had more of an effect on her that she was even willing to realize at that point in time, because she thought like, well, I guess it's just time to move on, just kind of leave it all behind. But she got really comfortable there. It's like, it's just sadly history repeating itself. Her family that she had for those 3 years, and I think that's what makes it a very neat parallel, is because they were both short-lived families for her, So obviously she had no intentions of getting mixed up in all of this, but Yelena kind of inadvertently drew her into all of this, because she was meeting up with her buddy who kind of hooked her up with everything to be like, okay, here, I've got you a whole bunch of identities that'll last you a while, got you all this information. I guess he's her go-to guy for like all that stuff. I guess they've kind of worked together, like, because I'm sure it's not just like the most recent stuff with the Avengers. I'm assuming it's like everything maybe post like the Red Room, post like breaking free of all that, and being prior to her being with Shield, like whoever this dude is, he's always been her contact. Then we don't really get into the ins and outs of the relationship. But I think on the very spy nature of things, I think that's very prevalent for us to not know who he is on that an extent. It's actually interesting too, because she's like, she makes this whole comment about like, I have friends, and he's like, if you have friends, people who have friends don't come and associate with me, because that means you literally have nowhere else to turn, and I'm the only person you can turn to. So that's kind of like the sad thing, because in this moment she has no one to turn to. The only friends and family she's known, some are either locked up, others are against her, and then others are on the run, you know? So I think it's actually interesting that she kind of has a little bit of an upbringing like Wanda did, in a sense that like Wanda and her family enjoyed watching a whole bunch of old school sitcoms. Granted, Natasha's reasons for it were very different. It's like, oh, you're supposed to assimilate with like American cultures and stuff like that so that you'll blend in. It's supposed to make you seem like the all-American normal family. So I think I think that's kind of interesting, and even to the point now, it's kind of similar to Wanda. It's kind of a pastime that maybe that's all she had, but she's like watching a sitcom that she know, or maybe it was a comedy or something. Like she was watching something and she knew it word for word. So it's just one of those things of like, right, it was just kind of a training thing, but I think it just become a natural part of herself. So I just thought it was interesting. Like you can draw parallels between her and Wanda in that regard. But like I said, like. Interestingly enough, we find out more about the Black Widow program before we get to like, you know, well, it kind of ties into the whole Yelena stuff. Is the fact is that like the way they were making it sounds like Natasha was part of at least the older school, like Black Widows, like Natasha Ford. It was very psychological how they basically psychologically brainwashed you, whereas now they've gone more the chemical route of brainwashing you, like Yelena was one of those people, and then one of the Black Widows she was hunting down ended up spraying her and ended up breaking her control, and now it was up to her to do something with all these other chemicals to undo the brainwashing, and she ended up sending them to Yelena because they were, no, to Natasha. I don't know if we ever got a real time frame on when that got sent to her, but at some point in time, Natasha's guy ended up getting all that from Budapest, and ended up, it's like, yeah, here's all your stuff from Budapest. She's like, you could have just gotten rid of that. It's like, the fact is that she didn't immediately throw it away, but I guess it's like maybe she was on her way to throw it all away while she had gas and everything. I should have known just because of the context of where the scene was, but when Taskmaster attacked Natasha, I was actually kind of caught off guard a little bit, but like the context of the bridge and everything, I should have known. But I love the whole thing of like, right, you should know I'm a better shot when I'm pissed off. Sadly. And that was all. And speaking of Taskmaster, I thought it was interesting because I wasn't quite sure if they were doing the more like, nah, it's just a straight up ability to mimic people's stuff, or whether they were making it more of a technological thing. Because I was thinking like the technological hookup, but it was like, nah, that's just giving her the HUD to kind of explain like everything, probably giving her like all relevant, well, I slipped and said her, but obviously once again we're talking spoilers anyway, but give her like all the information like jacked into the helmet, because the helmet's just one giant HUD, giving you all these readings and pointing you in the right direction of what you're supposed to be looking for. So obviously that first encounter was a pretty one-sided situation. I mean, to be fair, it's like this person studied everyone you've ever fought alongside, as well as, you know, using your own moves against you, so that kind of sucked. But obviously, eventually meeting up with Yelena, it's like, right, this is the first time they've seen each other since they were little girls. I would assume with the context of everything, they legitimately haven't seen each other in like 21 years. So, and it's like, you know, it's like, how do I know if I can trust you? How do I know I can trust you? And, you know, I think it's almost like very befitting, considering like, you know, siblings fight anyway. So, but it wasn't just like a playful fight of like, oh, I missed you. It's like a, nah, like that was a knuckle drag out brawl of like knocking and throwing each other into stuff, and then finally like choking each other. And it's like, all right, stop. All right. You know, and it's interesting too, because I feel like, Yelena's like relationship with, Natasha, and I think it's so interesting, like how, let's face it, she talked a lot of mad shit towards Natasha. For one, it's like, oh yeah, like you do all those poses and everything with your, she's like, what is that? You're a poser. She's like, no, it's not a pose. Like, well, I'm doing, you know, and I'm like, I love that she's poking fun at her about it. I even love the moment later on when she accidentally does it herself, and she's like, ugh, disgusting that she accidentally did it too. It's like, ugh. I love that. I love that bit coming back like that. And even just, and when Natasha like flips out the helicopter at one point in the movie and lands like that, she's like, oh, poser. But also gives her shit about like, right, like, oh, you know, why don't they bring it, like, I forgot the context of it, but it's like, oh yeah, bring in one of the bigger Avengers. And she's like, big ones? And it's like, she's like, yeah, I'm sure, like, the god from space wouldn't need to take like an ibuprofen after like a fight or whatever, which I felt like that's got to be such an inside thing, because like sadly, you know, Natasha and Clint always get like the most shit thrown at them as the Avengers because they're the only normal humans amongst the bunch, because at least Tony has his tech, Steve had the super soldier serum, and you know, Bruce is a literal, you know, hulking monster as a Hulk, and then also Thor as a god, or an alien that's just worshipped as a god, depending on like how MCU is still kind of not always clear on how they want to view the Asgardians, whether they're legitimately gods or whether just powerful aliens that have just been worshipped as gods. That, you know, that's been a whole conversation in itself. What I also think is really interesting about their relationship is that it isn't just all jokey, that there are serious elements to the relationship as well. I mean, especially because Yelena's like, well, why didn't you ever try and track me down? And it's like, well, because I thought you were living a happy life. I think there was a lot more to that, because I think probably tracking down Yelena, because in her own way, like, Yelena was a part of this fake life, and once again, they were only in family for 3 years, which meant a lot, but at the same time, going through everything that she did, she just kind of pictured that family just being like a part of her story, a part of her journey that she didn't want to remember anymore. That's how I kind of interpret that. But it was really interesting because obviously it kind of ties into the fact is Natasha's like, I want it to be more than just like the trained killers they wanted us to be. But then you have Yelena saying something very profound, and kind of like it sticks the dagger in deep when it comes to Natasha, and that is that we are, regardless of all that you've done, going off being an Avenger and everything, we are both still trained killers. You're just someone that's on the cover of magazines that you're a killer that little girls look up to. And I was like, that's actually super dark and messed up, you know? I mean, you know, for Natasha, like, I think that hit and struck a nerve, because it is a thing of like, no matter how much she tries, she can't erase her past. She can't erase the things that she's done, the blood that she spilled, regardless of the circumstances. She still did it. And knowing that she is kind of heralded as this hero, as she's one of the Avengers, she's seen as a hero, to know that, you know, I think that also, like, considering like what her upbringing was, to be this symbol for some, like, that line of like, right, you're this symbol to little girls, you're on the front of magazines, and you're this killer, like, it stuck the dagger in a little deeper. But also, like, Yelena was trying to hurt her, because it's like, right, you never found me after all this time, sister, you know. And obviously she gave that, you know, story about how she, you know, about, you know, the life that, you know, she made up, about the like regular life that, you know, Natasha was actually living and stuff like that, which it was meant to be a fun bit and funny bit and just like, oh, what, you know, but it's actually really sad when you break it down, because it's like, right, that like their lives are that their entire lives from beginning to end have been lies, because they're not even actual blood sisters or anything. So, you know, it just makes that even sadder, because it's like, right, like so much of our lives are dictated by us living lives, like who we are, like, you know. And so for her to come up with this backstory for her family and everything was like, it's funny, it's meant to be a little bit of a lighthearted thing, but there's actually a darker element to that, you know, when you really think about it. It's actually kind of, you know, like I said, sad and interesting. And since I did bring up that line earlier about, you know, the magazine cover and everything, it does make me wonder, does her past about the whole Budapest situation, does that correlate in some shape or form? Because obviously Antonia, the whole situation there, you know, using her basically as bait to make sure that Dreykov was in the building, and basically giving Clint the go-ahead of like, right, blow the building, because killing him was like her last, I mean, for one, it was like her way to get free of the Red Room, the whole Black Widow program, while also being like shifting over into S.H.I.E.L.D. And there's different layers to that. For one, maybe that's also why it's kind of like a thing for both Clint and her. Clint, because it's like, right, I'm responsible for killing a little girl, because I didn't know, you know, the only person that was supposed to be in there was like Dreykov. Like anyone else, you know, she wasn't meant to be the collateral damage she was. But I mean, I'd assume Clint knows that, not unless that's something that Natasha, because they talked about Budapest. Obviously there's a lot of struggles they went through. They were what, on the run and just kind of fighting off a whole bunch of people for like, what, 10 days or something like that. It almost seemed like they weren't going to be able to get out. Hell, we even see later on one of their hiding spaces, and that's actually, it was actually interesting because Yelena and Natasha hid there, and they look, and it looks like Natasha and Clint were playing both tic-tac-toe, multiple games, as well as it looked like it was like them playing Hangman. I'm assuming, just having pause on, I was like, that looked like that was the first, that word at least seemed like it was butterfly. I could be mistaken, but I was like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, had to bide their time some way, shape, or form. But it's sad that her way of getting free of the Red Room was staining her hand with more blood, and especially a little girl, especially coming from the circumstances of her childhood and her just being little, like what was kind of stripped away from her, and she kind of did that in a way to get her own freedom. And obviously that's gotta, that guilt is there, like, you know, because I'm sure with that life that she's lived, like there are plenty of people who deserved it, there were plenty of people who didn't deserve it, and Antonio was one of those people, you know. It's like, you know, but you know, that just shows you like how desperate she was to get Dreykov dead. She needed him dead because he's the man that stripped her of everything, you know. So I just think that's kind of an interesting element. Obviously, something I also thought was kind of interesting, and it's, I don't think it's a knock against the movie, I just thought it was interesting. I thought Taskmaster would have played a bigger role in the movie. Like, he's kind of like this, well, she's this, you know, threat that pops up every once in a while and stuff like that, but it's not, she's not the forever going threat, because it's all about finding the Red Room, finding Dreykov, and putting him down finally. Especially for Natasha, because she spent this entire time thinking it was over, but because she didn't make sure it was done, there's been plenty of other girls that have gotten drafted into this. Like, things have continued. Like, obviously her sister's been this living weapon this entire time because she didn't do what she was supposed to do, you know. So I think that's kind of an extra layer of guilt of why Natasha feels the need. I mean, for her own sanity, but also like, right, because I didn't do what I was supposed to do, so many other people got drafted into this, so many other people's lives were taken from them, like mine. So I have to make it up to not just myself, but all of them, to make sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else too. I mean, that was the whole reason why she wanted to kill Dreykov, but it was also self-interest of just like, I need to kill this guy because of what he did to me personally, you know, as well as my entire family to a certain extent. I also love the whole situation where they had to break Alexei, their dad, out of prison, and I love that whole bit. I mean, especially at the beginning, because he's like, oh, like he was tired of like the undercover work, but he's like, nah, put me back out in the battlefield. I want to give me my suit and everything. And I think that's so interesting, because I think you could draw parallels between him and, you know, Captain America, even whether it be Steve or Sam in that regard. Obviously, Sam, continuity-wise, obviously hadn't been Cap yet. I mean, even with the confines of like, even at the end of the movie, like he still wasn't yet. But it's, well, I'm sure it depends on like how you line up the timeline and everything like that. Regardless, just because Steve was someone that wasn't so like encapsulated by the persona of being Captain America, he was just himself, whereas Alexei identified himself as Red Guardian. It's like, this is who I am. It gave him pride, you know. He believed in this mission so much, and he kind of identified himself that he took glory in it, even to the point he made up this story about him clashing with Captain America, which I was like, when could you have done that? I was like, because I was like, you got the super soldier serum in you, but I'm like, no, I don't think you would, like, because I was like, maybe it could have been like a continuity thing where you could make the argument like they crossed paths like sometime during World War II, or maybe it was some point, you know, while Steve had gotten unfrozen. But I was like, no, it's like, I feel like you wouldn't be able to squeeze, because at that point, if they had crossed paths, Natasha would have been aware of it, you know, the Avengers and everything. But then, and he was like, they're like, yeah, when did you do that? He was like, oh, like in the 70s or 80s or something. Like, it's like, yeah, but Captain America was still frozen then. And it's like, oh, so I was like, okay, that's interesting. So he's a full-blown liar. I thought that was so interesting, because I guess he never had an opportunity. And the sad thing is, he still never got that opportunity to go toe-to-toe with Captain America. I mean, maybe that's something they potentially set up for the future, but, you know, because for him, it's like, no, we're not really enemies, but like, obviously, like, what they represent and what they stand for, it's more like a clash of ideologies, essentially, is kind of how he referred to it. But I like that, like, Steve wasn't even aware of you. And I think that's a really interesting thing, too, because obviously this was supposed to come out before Falcon and the Winter Soldier, obviously, but it's interesting to know, like, right, here's another super soldier that Steve was completely unaware of. I mean, granted, they were the ones that got shot and killed in Civil War, but still, I mean, technically there's the others in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but still, it's like didn't know about Isaiah Bradley, didn't know about Alexei, so it's interesting to think about in that regard. But I love that, like, he never got the showdown or the meetup with Captain America that I think he probably wanted, and just like, I guess to perpetuate his own legend, to feel more like amazing about himself, which I love that he's literally in the prison arm wrestling people, which is like you have the most unfair advantage. I love that one guy, he's making him feel like he's winning, and then he breaks his arm and it's just like, oh, like, stop whining. It's like, yeah, you literally broke his arm. You even see it and it's just like how limp it looks and everything. But Natasha and Yelena breaking them out, and I love that she basically calls an avalanche. We don't know what happened to that prison. Hopefully everyone's alive, but it's like, that's potentially a lot of dead people. People got just, I mean, hopefully it's just a thing of the prison got buried. But I love Yelena being like, wow, this would actually be a pretty cool, this would be like a super cool way to die. I'm like, I love like how kind of twisted her mind is about this perspective on things. But obviously, it's not the happy reunion Alexei was kind of hoping for, which I thought was so interesting. And then it's like, no, don't worry, we got enough fuel to get there. And then the helicopter crashes, and it's like, well, they have to make the rest of the way on foot. And obviously for him, it's like he's not getting the warm reception he thought they would. I even love Yelena being like, oh, like, you mean the program that you turned us over to? He's like, oh, is it your time? And it's like, no, we don't get that, because remember, they removed our uterus and everything. He's like, no, I don't want to hear like the scientific blah 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 about like what happened to you. It's like, well, you should know, you kind of basically handed them over to the program, and it's like, oh, like, you don't want to hear about all that happened to their reproductive organs and stuff like that, kind of stripped them of potentially having families and stuff like that, which once again played a little bit for a joke, but what they're saying is actually really dark and really messed up, you know. But then even Alexei, you know, they continue that with the fact is that Alexei's like, oh, but look at what, Yelena, you become one of the greatest assassins, and all that you've been able to do, Natasha, you brought nations to their knees, and you became an Avenger. It's like, I bet your ledgers are dripping red with blood. And he's like, I couldn't be more proud of you. I was like, neither one of, well, at least Natasha's definitely not going to look at that as an accomplishment. Neither is Yelena, like, now that she's kind of herself again. But now, like, the family has to fully get reunited when they meet up with Melina, who's like kind of just living her life on a farm, which that whole bit with her like stopping that pig from breathing was like actually really heartbreaking, especially because she was unaware, like talking about like, oh, look at how easy we can control them and stuff like that. And you can see Yelena just kind of being like, oh, like knowing like, right, her mom's kind of responsible for some of that as well. Like, she played her own role because she's the scientist, as Alexei says, like, oh, I'm the muscle. But it's a thing of like both of them played their role in this whole red room thing. Like, for them, it is a situation of neither one of them were willing to fight against it. They were just like, they kind of went along with it. Yeah, they might have had their reservations, or at the very least, now that they're older, after all this time, now they have their reservations about everything. They don't, you know, they don't have as much belief in the causes that they used to, especially seeing what it kind of did to their family. Whether it was for 3 years or not, there's still a special place that Yelena and Natasha hold in their hearts. Like, even the whole thing between Alexei and Melina, and I love the fact this is like, he's like, whoa, you named a pig after me? She's like, yeah, can't you see the similarities? Which he didn't appreciate that. But yeah, like, you know, Melina was completely unaware that the same programming she's using on these pigs and stuff like that were just used on her own daughter. And Natasha being like, yeah, this family was fake. But for Yelena, this family meant everything to her. And to hear her sister say, like, it didn't, and just to find, like, you know, it's like, once again, she's having to deal with the fact it's like, right, you've had time to process. You knew from the beginning our family was BS. I believed it to be true. And now to find out, like, everything was fake and everything, like, she never really had an opportunity to really fully process it with the entire family. Once again, Natasha was with the family and already knew that. Like, she spent the entire time never really knowing that, probably never really truly grasping it. I mean, too busy being like, obviously, like, brainwashed and turned into this weapon, you know. It's even sadder too because Melina, like, the moment they showed up, she called, like, you know, Dreykov and the others to let them know what was going on, because, you know, she talks to Natasha that, you know, obviously she's like, I was in the like the cycle of the Red Room 4 times, and it's like, you know, kind of like realizing, like, obviously everything that Tasha and Yelena went through, she went through as well. She's just another victim of this system that was created. So of course she'd kind of be like, it's kind of ingrained in you, and like breaking away isn't the easiest thing. Natasha's the only one that did, which that leads to resentment from Yelena, because it's like, right, you're the one that just kind of up and left us all behind. Me in particular, you never try to find me in like those years after you managed to escape and everything, you know. So, but I thought it was interesting how they handled that whole thing. Like, I mean, for one, finding out the reason why they couldn't find the red room the entire time, how it was always on the move, is because, I mean, maybe at one point in time it was on the ground, but after all these years, how they keep it on the move, it's literally a flying fortress. But I love the whole, like, reveal of, like, Natasha. Lena had actually switched places like that, which I actually love that bit between Alexei and her when he's thinking he's talking to Natasha and, you know, opening up to her, and he's like, wait, I'm here pouring out my heart and soul, and it's not even Natasha. Even later on trying to do the earpiece thing, and it's just like, no, you don't actually have an earpiece. It's like, what, there wasn't enough to go around, so you're not actually talking to her. You know, he tried to pour his heart out twice and it failed. I love it. But that interesting development of like, right, like I thought that was interesting how none of the Black Widows could actually hurt him, because he basically emits a pheromone that they can't like do anything against him. It's his way to protect him even more so. Like, even if they were to break free of his control over them, that they'd still never be able to actually do anything to him. And obviously the reveal of who Taskmaster really is. And I think that's such an interesting development. Not, obviously, you know, I'm not well versed in the comics, but I'm familiar with Taskmaster because of, you know, some video games as well as like some Spider-Man cartoons where he's popped up. So obviously making it Antonia, it obviously makes it a lot more personal, because this is one of the things Natasha's, and probably in her mind, this is probably one of the most messed up things she ever did. This is probably the biggest thing she regretted in her life, and I think there might be some relief in knowing like, oh, she's still alive, but also, you know, you got to blame yourself a little too, because of the circumstances you created. That gave her father the opportunity to make her into the weapon that she is. Just like he's weaponized every other widow, he did the same thing to his own daughter, which is kind of like heartbreaking, because she doesn't even talk or anything like that. It's like, oh, he's like, oh, you want to apologize to her? We should, you know, you shouldn't have blown off half her face. Like, he really cares. Like, maybe in some sick way this is him caring, because it's like, right, I made my daughter into the ultimate weapon, but it's still messed up that, you know, I mean, the way he did this to so many other people, I mean, I guess it shouldn't be too surprising that he did it to his own daughter, but knowing that, you know, once again, she's not even talking, because I think it's part of the control and conditioning he made her, you know, go through. But eventually, like, Natasha's talking a whole bunch of shit, and it pisses Dreykov off to the point he hits her, which I wasn't expecting that, and hits her, and she's like, keeps going like, oh, really? God, you're so weak. And she's antagonizing him so that he basically, like, because the pheromones, like, she needs to basically sever a certain part of like her sense of smell, and to basically have to sever something in here so that she can't smell it anymore. But it's like, right, you're too weak to actually do it, so I'm gonna have to do it myself. And she slams her own head into the desk. I was like, ugh. And because of that, she doesn't smell the pheromone anymore and is able to proceed to kick his ass. Was planning on straight up killing him. At the same time, you have Alexei going toe to toe with Taskmaster, but I also love the thing he's trying to have like a conversation with Melina, and it's like he turns around, she's going, it's like, damn it, like nothing I do, I can't have this serious like heart-to-heartfelt conversations I'm trying to have, whether it's with my pseudo fake, well, with my fake wife, and then my, you know, my daughter, you know. But I also once again, not getting as much of Taskmaster as I thought we would. It's just kind of like this threat that just kind of pops up every once in a while. That's about it, which I thought was kind of interesting. But I wonder, like I'm curious. I mean, let's face it, you know, Alexei's not in the best of shape, so I'm wondering if he was in better peak position. I mean, still got super soldier serum flowing through you, so that's got to compensate for something, but you're still going up against someone that can immediately mimic people's moves and stuff like that. Regardless, all the widows getting activated and Natasha going up against all of them, which is still the thing of like, I'm sure for some people it's like, well, she's never in any danger, because it's like, we already know because it's the past. It was pretty rough, especially when they like had her and each one of them was just like coming over like punching and kicking her. I was like, that's rough, dude. to kind of be in that position. I mean, luckily Yelena showed up in time and was able to kind of cure everybody. The whole final sequence is really interesting too because, I mean, well, first and foremost, I think we can say for sure Dreykov is now fully dead. But I think it's interesting because a lot of stuff comes full circle where Natasha is able to kind of make up for her past in many different regards. For one, she saved Antonia Taskmaster because it's like, right, I don't, you know, I know you're going to come after me and you have like every right to, but I'm going to save you. Because for her, it's like, I failed you before, this is my opportunity to make up for it this time. And even, you know, at the very end, like, breaking the vial and freeing her, even her saying the line of, is he gone? Because I think, you know, for her, it's like, yeah, that was her maybe loving father at one point in time, but he was her tormentor, you know, now. He was the one that made her into this weapon. So I took those, is he gone, like, oh, I'm finally free, because it wasn't just, you know, Natasha's freedom, it was everyone's freedom in the program. I mean, granted, there's still plenty of Black Widow, or, agents scattered all across the world internationally, which I think that's kind of interesting to set that up, because I guess that becomes like her family's mission, like while she's away, like Milena, like coming up with some more cures for everybody, and it kind of being up to them to kind of save their sisters, especially when the other Black Widows return and like, no, we weren't going to leave you behind. So it's like, right, because regardless of everything, they're sisters in this as well. They're all victims of this thing. So it's kind of like, we're in this together. So this, like, it begs question about everything that kind of ultimately happens. But I think it's kind of a thing of like, it's like, obviously, you know, Natasha told them they can all make their own choices, and they did, and that involved them coming back. So I think they're going to work with Alexei, Milena, and Yelena trying to, you know, save all the other, you know, widows, you know, all the other victims of the Red Room. I also love, obviously, like, I didn't talk about it earlier, but I love that whole jacket bit. You know, it's just kind of like, yeah, it's like she's got the vest and everything, and it's like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of pockets on it, and it's like, you know, it's like, no, I know you like it. Yeah, it is pretty cool. Like, I love that Yelena is kind of dorky in that regard, and even giving it to Natasha at the end. Just like, yeah, I know how much you like it and everything. But like I said, just a lot of opportunities to fix a lot of what was broken. Even her looking at like this broken family, this makeshift family, even telling Yelena, it's like, no, it was real for me too. I'm sorry, sister. Like that, I kind of said that I didn't come looking for you, you know. And, you know, but now it's like she prepared this family of hers, and now she's thinking like, right, if there was hope for me fixing this family, then maybe there's just a little bit of hope for me helping fix the Avengers too. So obviously she had called Ross in for backup and everything, and they kind of show up, and her family kind of goes off, and it's like, but that exit makes me sad, because it's like, right, that's potentially the last time Natasha saw her. Probably, I mean, we don't know who got blipped in the 5-year time skip in Endgame, so we don't know if any of them were around. Maybe, you know, all of them got blipped, maybe some of them did, we don't know. But it's sad to, you know, think that might be one of the last times, because after this she's trying to, like, in the process of like probably eventually meeting up with Steve. I'm assuming like this is when Steve like broke her and Sam out, because we know that Scott and Clint took the deals so that it can be with their family, so they weren't on the run like, you know, Natasha, Steve, and Sam were. It is something that I kind of had in my head about this movie, kind of not being about Natasha, but more specifically about her legacy, and that being like, once again, this legacy of kind of like saving all the other victims of the Red Room, like her correcting her past in many different regards, saved, well, you know, Antonia, you know, Taskmaster, which means Taskmaster's still alive and well in this universe potentially, so maybe in this universe they're going to make Taskmaster a good guy. Well, because that also depends on the whole Valentina thing, which we'll get to in a second, but, you know, all these other women from the Red Room being saved as well, and I think all of them being broken free, it's because of Natasha. Like, so they, as well as the Avengers in their own right, are kind of her legacy. Like, she helped pave the way to save everything in Endgame, but also like she saved so many lives in this regard, and who knows like what the trickle and ripple effects that could be in the long run. But since I am bringing it up, I thought it was poetic that Natasha's grave is underneath a tree, because Dreykov brought up the fact is that her mom was buried under a tree. He was a dick about it, being like, oh, like the grave said unknown, because like I don't know her name. She was just some random woman that was in my way. Because Natasha grew up thinking her mom, like there were, you know, it's like, right, she was paid for, but her mom had never given up. The rest of the family, I think, is like, yeah, we got paid for her, but her mom is like, no, like she never gave up and tried to find Natasha, and she was unrooting a lot of secrets related to the Red Room, so she needed to be neutralized. So, you know, I think it's very poetic that, like, you know, Natasha got to be buried under a tree like her mom. And it makes you wonder, is that something she told Clint? You know, well, I was about to say, because she probably never had the time to talk to Clint, but I mean, she was on the run with like Steve and Sam for like 2 years, so like who knows what happened in that time frame. That would have, you know, that maybe that could have kind of filled in certain regards there. But obviously, it's interesting, you know, obviously, Yelena going to her sister's grave and even doing the whistle thing, and obviously not getting a response, but Valentina being there and just the most uncouth thing of like blowing her nose, like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm like allergic to the Midwest. If you're unaware, and kind of spoilers for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, if you haven't seen Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it's kind of a slight spoiler, but this movie is actually her first appearance, because obviously this was supposed to come out before Falcon and the Winter Soldier, so it's interesting to kind of get those appearances backwards. It didn't spoil anything in that regard. It's just that, you know, news had came out, so we were aware at the very least that she was going to be in this movie, that this is supposed to be her first appearance. But now it begs the question, because we know because we're still unclear everything that Valentina, you know, exactly what role she's playing, because obviously there's thoughts of like she's kind of playing a Lady Hydra, Madam Hydra role, or maybe something else, but obviously she's putting together a crew. We know everything with spoilers, U.S. agent and everything, that that they've set up that in Falcon and Winter Soldier, but now it turns out like, oh, Yelena's working with her. Granted, we don't know how long Yelena's been working with her, but I'm assuming maybe her, as well as like Alexei, as well as Elena, are all working for her as well, because there have been thoughts about potentially like stuff with Ross, like setting up what is the group he leads or whatever it's called, the Thunderbolts, I believe. Like this might be kind of connected to all that. Who knows exactly like what Valentina's up to, but obviously she's got some version of a squad. But what I thought was really interesting was the stinger at the end, where it's like, oh, here's the person responsible for your sister's murder, and it's a picture of Clint. And I'm like, that's interesting. I mean, truth be told, it's the only people that were there were Clint and Natasha, so no one else was. But I mean, I'm sure everyone took Clint at his word, but it's probably a thing of like, right, your sister's dead because of him. So immediately in my brain, it's like, oh, that's kind of sad that like Natasha's like only other friend, well, aside from the guy that she's actually friends with at the end, you know, when she goes off to like, you know, he got her the jet and everything necessary, like, oh, I'm gonna go try and help the Avengers. Like, I wonder, is her pal gonna pop up in the future more? I mean, he's potentially alive and well in this universe, at least based on the last time we saw him. But to know like that they're gonna set that up where, because you know, the theory a lot of people had going into this would be like Yelena would kind of play the role of the new Black Widow. She'd kind of replace Natasha in that regard. Maybe there's still room for that, or maybe she plays the role of a more ambiguous Black Widow, in the sense that she toes that line between not just being a hero, but she kind of does a lot of the dirty work, kind of like it seemed like she might be obviously in the same profession, the same line as like U.S. agent will be kind of going forward. So maybe it's going to be a thing of kind of does some dirty work, but also does some hero stuff, because we don't know if the whole Widow situation has been like all the Red Room stuff, if that's all been completely dealt with at this point in time. I'm also curious, like, because we know there's going to be a Hawkeye series, obviously setting up Kate Bishop as well, but I'm wondering, will this tie in that regard? Like, because to our knowledge, that's the next time we see Clint. I don't know if that's going to be, who knows, once again, in timeline-wise, like, where, like, Yelena's getting this information about Clint, whether that's going to take place after the Hawkeye series, or will it take place during the Hawkeye series. I feel like I vaguely remember hearing that she was going to pop up in it, now that I think about it. I think I remember hearing that she was going to, I don't know if it's something that official came out, whether that was just something leaked or whatever, but I do vaguely feel like I remember hearing that she was going to be in it. I'd actually completely forgotten about it till now, but now she might serve the role of kind of an antagonist, because she might be gunning for Clint, because I don't know, beyond the Kate Bishop stuff, I'm not 100% aware of like what to really expect from like the Hawkeye show, you know. So maybe that's at least going to be part of the story. Probably may not be the main overarching thing. Maybe that just means Hawkeye's story will kind of tie into this Valentina stuff in some shape or form. So I don't know, just kind of gets you thinking. I'm curious, because I know a lot of people have issue with this being a prequel, especially at this point in time, especially because for some people they feel like this takes away from Natasha's story, especially how it ends at Endgame. I don't feel that way, but I can understand why people do. To me, it doesn't take away from it, this movie happening after. I know for a lot of people it's just simply a thing of they wanted this movie to happen way earlier than now, and I can get that criticism, but still, the movie to me I think did a good job, like I said, what's the word I'm looking for? Encapsulating Natasha's legacy in many different regards when it came to her family, as just well as just what it's set up in this universe. There is a lot left open in the universe of knowing, like, okay, so like once again, where does the Red Room stuff stay? Where does Alexei and Elena and Yelena, well, we have some idea where Yelena stand, but where do their parents stand in all this? I brought it up before, like, well, we do have a new Captain America, that being Sam, so does that mean Sam and Alexei will cross paths? Is that going to be Alexei's chance to kind of finally cross paths with Captain America, you know, stuff like that? I'm curious. It leaves questions open about, you know, the possibilities of all the stuff that still exists out there in the MCU that they can always pull from and utilize in some shape or form. Because that's the big thing of like, when's the next time we're going to see some of this stuff? It could potentially be a Captain America 4, because we know that's on the way. But like I said, it may be a Hawkeye. They feel like they're the most likely opportunities for us to see a lot of this stuff kind of pop up or get used again in some shape or form. Obviously, these are just my thoughts about it. We'll ultimately have to wait and see what comes afterwards, you know. But you know, from what we know about what's coming up next in the MCU, you know, movie and TV wise, Hawkeye and Captain America 4 seem like the most likely point we'd see, especially because I mean it fits tonally too, considering they're the more like potentially grounded, you know, action, you know, potentially spy thriller level stuff to a certain extent. So I think, you know, that kind of fits in that regard. But obviously I've kind of done enough rambling. Obviously, you know, these are just some of my thoughts. I'd love to get to know yours in the comments down below. What your thoughts about the movie in general, what some things you liked, what do you think, where do you think a lot of this stuff will lead us going forward in the MCU? Just let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.